Let's do it. Hi, and welcome to the Andrew Price Podcast. A podcast named because I'm narcissistic and I want something named after me. I don't know. I used to have the Blender Guru podcast, and many people have been asking me if I would reboot it. And the problem with the Blender Guru podcast was that I wanted to have guests on there at some point, like 2D artists and people not necessarily in Blender, and the name put them off because they thought it was only about Blender, so it was hard to convince them. So anyways, I thought something vague, something, and just give it a name, so it's just my name. So it's the Andrew Price Podcast. Now, the point of this is that they're on YouTube, which you might be watching this now. I've been making tutorials, as you probably know, about how to use Blender. But the problem is that the tutorials is only the technical side. There's also an equally, if not more important side, and that is artist habits, like how to stay motivated. How do you deal with burnout? How do you, get feedback? How do you use feedback? Like all these little things that are like critical to becoming a successful artist, and doesn't really fit in a tutorial format. I've done like a couple of little videos like that over the years, but like it's better suited to a podcast format, right? So that's exactly what this is. So I am actually sitting in front of a camera. Some of you can see that on YouTube, but some of you might also just be listening to it on other platforms. Eventually it's going to be broadcast out to all the different platforms. It does take a little while for it to propagate or whatever, but eventually it'll be out on all the major platforms. Now, this episode in particular is one that I've wanted to do because I was looking at that video that I did, or the presentation, I should say, I gave at the 2016 Blender Conference, and it was called The Habits of Effective Artists. Originally, it was called The 7 Habits of Effective Artists, but then the Stephen Covey crew said it was trademarked, so I had to change it, which fair call to them. Like it was a homage to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and you could confuse the two and think that it was part of their brand, so fair call to them. I don't actually care. But anyways, when I made that presentation, I didn't think it was, it was like, it's another presentation. I've done them over the years, and yet it blew up beyond anything I could have imagined. Like in some circles, I'm actually more known for that than actually Blender Guru. Like I went to an art conference, and I was standing in a group, and then somebody was like, "Oh, you're the and I'm like, yes, that's right, the Blender Guru." He's like, "You're the guy who did the habits talk." And I was like, that 30 minutes of fame. So I don't know. It's like 2.8 million views or something. It did crazy well, and I watched it again recently, and I agree with me. First of all, the points were right, but not necessarily if you are a beginner. So there are a few things that I think I would word differently today, and I would maybe tack on a few different extra habits instead. So there's 2 that I might say are not good for beginners, and there's a few others. So we'll get to that eventually. So that's what this episode is going to be on. Episode 1, right? Episode 1. Let's revisit a talk that I did there eventually. So that's by the way, it's going to be the format of this kind of podcast. It's like I want to kind of maybe make it about a topic, but I also want to do Q&A, right? Because I did kind of like live streams, and it was really interesting to read questions, but then it was a live stream. Who watches live streams? Who watches live streams, right? Nobody does. I guess maybe the multi-billion-dollar Twitch company might disagree, but to me at least, I'm more inclined to listen to a podcast than a live stream. So I figured I'd just do it in a podcast. Anyways, let's just cut to the chase here. So 7 habits, starting with number 1, revisited. Daily work. So this was the habit that I said was a deceptively simple sounding habit. It is daily work. And why daily work? What's so important about daily work? Why not just do a bunch of work in lump sums when you have the time? Like if you did like an hour every day, which is what I do, versus doing like 7 hours on the weekend, what's the difference? Well, The problem with the clumps of time is that they never really pan out, or they rarely pan out, let's say that. Life is full of distractions, especially today with the technical abilities that we have. We are now overrun with multi-billion-dollar companies that are designed to keep us on their platform as much as possible. So as much as you really want to get into Blender, you might find yourself opening up Reddit or Netflix, or insert whatever platform you happen to be addicted to at this current time. It's one of those things. So daily work, I think, is actually one of the most crucial things. I'm doubling down on this. I agree with me 100%, and I want to put another 100% on that. It is, at the start, probably the most important thing that you could develop as a habit. Because, for example, I, for the last 18 months, have been doing 2D artwork. So if you watch that presentation, you know I did a 6-month stretch trying to really, really learn 2D artwork, and I learned a bunch of things, and that was the whole point of the presentation. Since then, I've been doing 18 months on the iPad, and I got back into it because I got the iPad as a Christmas present. It's funny how like sometimes the thing holding you back is just like a piece of technology, and I got the little stylus thing, and I was like, oh man, this feels like drawing on paper, but with layers, and it's digital and it's fun. So it's been fun. And yeah, so I've been doing that every hour, 1 hour per day. What else changed from 2020 to 2016 when I did the presentation? I now have 2 kids. So I have a little girl, 2.5 years old, and a little boy, 7 months old. And now my time is more limited. So I work during the day on my business, so I don't, do the creative 2D drawing then. But once the kids are in bed, there's a window. And every parent knows about this window. There's the window that you look at your clock and you get the kids in bed and you got to brush your teeth, because when it's time to, and then it's 7 p.m. and I have from 7 until 8 p.m. to do my drawing. If I don't do it in that time window, guess what? It doesn't get done. So there's a huge incentive to get it done. That's what I do. Now, if you didn't have a slot, if you had a kind of like, I'm just going to do it whenever I think of it, every day, you have to make a decision, am I going to practice this skill? And it's a subtle thing. It doesn't sound like much. It's like having a slot versus finding time for it. They're miles apart, right? You have to then, that's why they say, like, if you want to lose weight, one of the best things you can do is put on your gym clothing when you go to bed at night. So that in the morning you wake up, you're already ready to go, and your shoes are at your bed, and then you hit the gym. The other thing I talked about was like doing the minimal thing possible when you don't feel like doing anything, like doing one line, right? Draw one line on a piece of paper. Can I do one line? You go, yes, I can do one line. And the whole point of that is that, of course, by the time you sit down, get the paper out, get the pencils, get everything ready, clear your desk, you never do just one line. You end up sort of like scribbling, doodling, and before you know it, the time has flown by and you've really delved into it. So getting past that initial thing, like I think, was it Rick Rubin? Rick Rubin, the producer for a lot of very successful rappers, he said rappers get this. They get like writer's block when it comes to writing songs. And so he tells them, like, don't go home and write the song. Like, he doesn't give them that homework. He said, can you go home and write one word of your next song? And they're like, come on, man. I don't know how they say that. It's probably very offensive. No, it was a white guy. Come on, man. He's, anyway. And they say, yeah, of course I can do that. So then they go home that night, and of course what happens? They end up writing the entire song, right? It's the idea of actually starting that is the biggest friction point for a lot of people. Anyways, so yeah, double down on that. Daily work, 100%. Make sure that's really all you need to do. By the way, as a comparison, I've also been learning sculpting. So I do an hour of the 2D stuff at nighttime, but in the mornings, right before I start work, I've been doing sculpting. But guess what? I didn't make it that much of a priority. And I said, sometimes I've got so much work that day that I need to skip my sculpting or fit it in at the end of the day when I have time. And wouldn't you know it? It doesn't get done. So that's the big difference. I'll finish like 4 artworks, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 artworks for the month when I do it an hour every day in my 2D stuff. Sculpting, I might get halfway through it by the end of the month, right? Because you never find that time. You think you do, but you don't. So highly recommend it. That's the one thing. Okay, I've ranted for 10 minutes on point 1. I should hurry things along. So we're going to get to point 2 now, which was, oh, that's right, volume, not perfection. So they did a study of composers throughout history to find out what was it that led some composers like Beethoven, Mozart, those are the only 2 I know, to have successes. Why was it that they had some like hits, the big hits, whereas a bunch of other composers at the time didn't? And the answer that they arrived at was the larger the volume, the amount of work that they actually produced, the higher chances that they actually had a success, a spike in it. So it's sort of directly correlated with that, right? And it kind of makes sense when you think about it from the point of view of like when you're making art, sometimes things don't work and you have to try a bunch of things. It's kind of like the startup methodology. Throw stuff against a wall and see what sticks. Split testing. It's like live split testing, but with the work that you produce. Like Beeple, right? The everyday artwork guy, which I actually don't recommend for 3D artists, especially if you're a beginner. But, he's produced so many that like he's got so many hits now, right? That could actually look really good on a printed piece. Some that obviously wouldn't look good. But of course, one every day for 10 odd years or whatever it is, you would be surprised if there wouldn't be some stinkers in there. Anyways, now, and Ira Glass, he did a quote which I mentioned, like the most important thing to do when you're trying to get into the skill is to get through a volume of work. Now, I agree with all that, and I think this is important to remember, that perfectionism can hold you back. Striving to be better than your last piece, we should all do that. But perfectionism itself, obsessing over details, can throw you off. The problem with this, and the point that I think is not necessarily applicable to beginners, is that it can cause a habit of mindlessly powering through artwork, almost as a, what would you call it? Like trying to hit a quota, right? Like some professors would tell their art students, like, there's 10,000 bad drawings in you. So how quickly are you going to get through those 10,000 drawings? Now, I understand why they would say that, and I agree with it. There are 10,000, maybe even more. However, if you follow that to a T, it can lead to a habit of not thinking about what you're doing and just thinking like, I just got to get through this. I got to get through this. So I was looking at some of my previous artwork over the last 18 months, and I realized I had that in the back of my mind of just powering through. And it was not conscious, which is actually point 4, which we'll get to, conscious learning. So I think it is a good skill. I think it's definitely like once you know the air, and that's the other crucial thing, like the reason an expert, like that's a good thing for experts, is that they know which areas will actually lead to the perfection. As a beginner, you end up adding details and like, fiddling with the topology of a model, or I was looking at some of my sketches from like last year, and it was like I'm putting like detail in like the hairs or the back of the ear, and like you don't need that, right? Your eyes are focused on the eyes generally of a portrait, and adding detail can actually distract you from the other points. So you might think you're perfecting a piece, you might actually be making it worse because you don't understand what it is. So anyways, that's I would say it's good, but not necessarily for beginners. I think point 4, conscious learning, is important. Okay, number 3, steal. Now, this is one that I would say a hard no, I think, for beginners. So I talk about stealing and how every artist that we think is this great genius person isn't really, right? Like, they generally have copied from artists that came before them. We sort of imagine that that I don't know, they're geniuses and that they just come up with original ideas themselves. But that's not true. There's a great series on Vimeo, by the way, called Everything is a Remix. You should watch that if this is a new concept to you. There's another book, Steal Like an Artist. That's another a great book that talks about just the extent at which great artists in history take from those who came before it, and why there's no other alternative, because the idea of coming up with an original idea that hasn't been thought of before is kind of impossible, right? At first I heard that, I'm like, that can't be true. What do you mean you can't have an original thought? I'm going to think of something original right now. But like, yeah, you might have an original of like those particular things, but it's like, it's been done, like things like that have been done before. And the chances of somebody looking at something that you just thought and like squinted your eyes at and then came out with something and going, wow, that's original, pretty slim, I would say. The way that it's done, and the way, like, there's a quote by Gary Painter, which I actually mentioned in the talk, who said that if you steal from one person, people will say, "Oh, you're the next whoever." But if you steal from 10 people, they'll say, "Wow, you're so original," right? And that's the key point. Conan O'Brien said that he wanted to be like the late night host that came before him. I think Jay Leno. Jay Leno said he wanted to be. I can't remember one of the early late night TV show hosts. Like, they all had people they admired and they wanted to be like, but it was through their failure to copy someone that they actually found their true self and their true voice. So that's kind of how that works. What was I talking about with the multiple pieces? Yeah, I think that's also a key point. If you shouldn't steal from one person, you should steal from multiple people. I think that is the kind of the key ingredient there. You don't copy someone's exact like trace over their drawing, because that is a copy. That's wrong. Stealing, however, stealing ideas and combining them into something new, taking the style from this person, the way they shade, the exaggeration, the shape language, bringing it all together into something weird and new. People go like, whoa, that's cool, right? Because it hasn't been done before, right? Or has it? So anyways, steal is important. However, now this is the reason I don't think it is good for beginners, is that at the start, you need to know the fundamentals. When I look at my old presentation from 2016, I looked at the works that I did. I was doing stylization that I didn't understand. And I think I wasted a lot of time doing that. I was doing a sort of cartoony, like big eyes. And I was taking a style that I'd seen other people do and I was bringing it in there. I didn't know what the original looked like. And that's important. Like, people wonder, like, why do you need to know photorealism? Why are you harping on photorealism so much, Andrew? Like, in all my tutorials, it's always photorealism based. And that's because at the start, everyone needs to know it. To give a more example, about a year ago, I got into caricatures. And I started because I was trying to do like hyper-real sketches of faces. And I realized that like even moving something like a millimeter off, like if the nose is a millimeter too high or low, it doesn't look like the person anymore. And I thought, well, I got to learn likeness. Like, what is it that makes somebody looks like themselves? And so I got into caricatures, which is all about like extreme exaggeration of the features that are unique to that person. So if they've got a forehead that's slightly larger than the average forehead, then that's the part you exaggerate. But you also have to subtract another area in order to exaggerate something else. It's a very unique skill. And I failed at it hard. Like, I remember drawing Leonardo DiCaprio and Kanye West, each of them maybe 50 times, right? Trying to get a likeness. And I failed. I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, what makes Kanye West look like Kanye West? I figured it was like the jowls, something to do with, he's got big cheeks for some reason. I'm like, but it still didn't look like it. I couldn't figure it out. And I can't remember what it was that triggered me to go back to realistic drawings, but I'm glad I did, because then I spent like another year-ish on photoreal drawings. And then looking back at the caricatures, I'm like, what on earth was I doing? I didn't understand what the original form looked like. I didn't know what the average face looked like so that I could tell when there was a deviation from that. Like, when I looked at some of the old caricatures, I'm like, why did I make the chin big? They don't have a big chin. They have a big nose, right? Like, I couldn't figure. So what is this even point about? It's about stealing, right? So exaggeration and style and all that kind of stuff, it's fun, it's attractive. Every artist wants to have a style of their own, and stealing is a big part of that, and, you know, copying from people that you love. But at the beginner stage, you just need to learn the fundamentals. You need to know what life looks like. I know it's boring. It doesn't have to be boring, by the way. You can find nice photos and create those, and it will be enjoyable when you start cracking through these lessons and figuring out, like, oh, that's what makes that thing look like that. It's not as boring as it sounds. Like, I know fundamentals are kind of boring, but it's The alternative is to do what I've done painfully and to just go through and like, no, I'm going to do the fun stuff, caricatures, and then 6 months later look back and go like, that was kind of a waste of time. Almost, right? I don't have a drink. Let me get my drink bottle. I need a drink. Yeah. I also need more aircon, but it's too far to go, so I'll just sit here and sweat it out. Sweat bucket. Sweat lodge, sweat bucket. We'll call it a sweat bucket. All right. Number 4, conscious learning. So this is a painful one because I made the exact same mistake that I mentioned in my presentation. So conscious learning is about being conscious of what you are actually doing and seeing the mistakes when you make them. And I talked about how what I do is lonely, right? I'm at home by myself. Well, I got a family, but that doesn't count. And sometimes all I want to do at the end of the day is to listen to podcasts. Listen to a lot of podcasts. That's part of the reason I started this one. And I like to listen to podcasts while I'm drawing. That was the thinking that went into it. The problem was that when I looked back on some of my weeks of drawings, I realized I wasn't learning. They weren't getting better, and they should have been. And it was because of the podcast. I wasn't really in it. I was just kind of like volume. I was trying to do that volume thing. And unfortunately, I made the exact same mistake recently. I went back through the last 18 months of drawings where I had been using podcasts whilst I drew, at least some of them. And I was making mistake after mistake, and I was not being conscious of what I was doing wrong. So conscious learning is about when you finish something, it's about coming back to it. Or when you make a mistake, so you finish one, compare it to the one that just came before it. So I finish one face, then I compare it to that face, and I actually look at it and go what went wrong here, and actually calling attention to it and going wow, every time I draw a face, the nose is longer down than it needs to be. I keep making that mistake. I need to address that. The next face I'm going to draw is not going to be like that. Now, if you listen to a podcast or you're, heaven forbid, watching TV, God help you. Some people say that oh, I do this thing while I watch TV. And it's I don't think you're doing that thing very well. Oh, I'm learning to bake whilst I watch Friends. It's yeah, well, it might take you a lot longer than if you turned Friends off. Anyways, where was I going? Don't do that. You have to be in it. Otherwise, what are you doing? You might as well just sit down and watch TV then. Do one or the other. This myth of multitasking that we are, as humans, we can multitask is exactly that. It is a myth. Look into it, by the way. There's that myth of that women can do 2 things, men can only do 1. Turns out that's completely false. We can't, neither of us can do anything more than once. At the same time. It's basically a terrible myth that has persisted, and it has led to a lot of people to do what I'm doing right now, ramble whilst I'm trying to look something up on the phone and fail at it. Point number 5, rest. So I talked about why when you're in an artwork, when you've been looking at it and you're working on it for a long time, it's kind of like an afterburn, right? You know, when you're in a dark room and you're looking at a monitor and then the monitor turns off and you get that afterburn, that it's all orangey red or whatever in your eyes, and it's it's been burned into your retina a little bit. It's like that with art. You get art burn. Art burn, is that a word? I don't know. You get that because you've been looking at it for so long. You can't have an outside perspective. You can't have the experience that somebody walking into the room and looking at your art piece will have. They'll have a gut reaction that you don't because you've been looking at it for so long. You don't know what stands out and what's wrong with it. So rest is highly important. I would change it to pause. Rest, and I had a photo of me lying on the floor next to the cat. I think people will take that too far and get carried away and, take a week off or be I'm just playing a video game. I'm resting, I would say pause, and that's because what I do now is when I'm working, so I'm actually working on a Breaking Bad series, I'm learning painting and I'm doing it I just did Mike, the Breaking Bad guy, and I'm oh, that's fun. And then I started doing Jesse, and then I'm doing Walter White, and I'm I might as well just do the whole crew and put them all together. It might be interesting. But anyways, I was like hitting a brick wall as I was like trying to paint Mike. I'm like, it doesn't look like him. Something's wrong. And I kept coming back to it day after day. And I'm like, I'm just not feeling it. I don't know. Something's not right. But I'll move on to Jesse. So I'll just start painting Jesse. And then when I came back to Mike, I was like, oh, this might be why it doesn't look like him. Put a bit more value there, put a bit more value there, maybe more shadow. And then I hit a brick wall and I'm like, I don't know what to do next. Whenever I hit that feeling, I don't know what to do next, I jump to another art piece. So I strongly recommend simultaneous artworks at the same time because, yeah, for that exact reason, you need a refresher. And like, what better way to refresh it than to completely jump to something totally different? By the time you jump back to it, it's completely fresh. So now I've got 3 on the ongoing at the same time: Walter White, Jesse, and Mike, Mike Trout. That was his name. Anyway, and I like, I'll spend 5 minutes on one, and then I jump to another, and I spend 5 minutes, and then I jump to another, and I spend 5 minutes. By the time I jump back to the original one, it's like, whoa. Like, that's wrong. And then I go through it. And that's great because there's so much of what you do as an artist is almost like a back and forth. You take like one step forward, then you take a step back, and you take another step forward and another step back, and you make something better, and then you make something worse. And sometimes you don't know what you're doing that's making it better or worse, and it can be accidental. And I think having multiple projects on the go really gives you that breather between it. So highly recommend that. So that's pause. I would say pause, not rest, because I know you guys get carried away with the rest. All right, number 6 was get feedback. So feedback is worth its weight in gold if it had a weight. I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially, you might think of like some great artists. Like there's what's that saying? Too many cooks spoil the broth, right? I don't know. There's a case for that, and I don't know the specific case that like more hands actually can ruin something, right? Maybe like multiple directors, creative directors might spoil the broth. But generally speaking, I think that's false. In fact, I think I even read a book that was talking about that. Essentially, a lot of the great artists of history, a lot of the great artists that you might love, use feedback from as many places as they can. I remember like when I was using Blender, I would always get my wife's feedback. And I've later learned that that's like a common thing that most artists do, is they'll get their wife's feedback to just give a gut reaction, a gut feedback. And it is very helpful. And I talked about how valuable it can be to get experts' feedback, to have like an expert opinion. The problem with that is that when you are a beginner, the experts do not want to hear from you, okay? I know that sounds callous, but look, if I answered every email or tweet or message that said, hey, Andrew, I've just finished the donut, can you give me feedback? I wouldn't be doing this right now. I would get nothing done, right? So I have a blanket rule. I'm not going to answer the hundreds of messages that come through. No feedback whatsoever. And here's the other thing. Every expert is like that, basically. A lot of experts do not answer their ArtStation messages. They do not answer random emails. There is too many things already on their plate. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes like, I have nothing to do today. I wonder what I could possibly do. Let me open up my email. I could give some feedback. Like, it doesn't happen, right? Everybody today has stuff that they need to get to. So you as a beginner are stuck. Like, what do I do? How am I supposed to get feedback when no expert wants to give it? Well, there's 2 ways. One is the paid route, okay? If you want to pay for advice, you can get it. So you could go through a school, which I don't recommend. Maybe we'll do a podcast episode on that in the future. I don't recommend art school. I think it is highly overblown for what you get in terms of price. There are websites like mentorship programs that a lot of experts are now giving away. You can I've been to a few. I think Mentorship Coalition is one for 3D artists, started by Josh Lynch. No, Josh Lynch? Is it Lynch? Oh, gosh, I hope that's his name. But anyways, go there. But yeah, people like artists, and like compared to the cost of a school, it's a fraction of the price, and it's probably better because they actually work in the industry. But you don't need to pay for it when you're starting out. And this is why. When you are starting out, you don't need the advice of an expert. You just need to know how to replicate real life. Okay, the best value for money to get an expert's opinion would be once you're at that aesthetic creative stage, like shape language or exaggeration or form, gesture, poses, character, concept art, like design, that kind of stuff that's kind of subjective, I think is where an expert could really give their opinion. But at the start, you don't have the fundamentals yet, right? So the way to get the fundamentals is to replicate life. As I said, photorealism, that's all anyone really needs to learn. So this is what you can do. And this is what I realized, earlier this year is like, if I'm doing terrible faces, if I'm drawing terrible faces, I should just have the photo next to me like that. I draw the face. And then at the end of it, I take the drawing and I move the layer across until it's on top of the photo. And I see where I was off. And I drew, sometimes I get a red marker and I draw in like red and I go, the cheek was too far out. The back of the head is always wrong. And then I go, okay, next. And then I try it again and then again and again and again. And guess what? It's like getting an expert feedback. It's like having an expert over your shoulder going, the cheeks are too big, chin is too small, ears are too long, whatever, right? Because you've got it right there. And it's the best thing. It's like when I figured it out, I'm like, wow, more artists should know this. They should know that there is a free expert sitting over their shoulder and it is called photos. So take advantage of that. If you're a 3D artist, I recommend the exact same thing. You don't need thoughts and opinions from experts. All you need to do is find a photo of something that you realistically could actually create. That's a very important piece we'll get to. But don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't start with a character and go, I'm going to replicate a character. It's going to be a painful process. Start with something small. I'm looking in the corner of my room. There's a kettlebell. You could make a kettle bell or a kettle, either one. Something small, something you could model, get the textures right. And then when you finish it, you render it, overlay it exactly 1-to-1 on top of it. And it's got to be like, by the way, like make it easy to flick back and forth. So I put it in Photoshop and just like turn the layer on and off. When you go back and forth, you'll notice so many things are wrong. The shape of it is off. The lighting isn't as bright as the reference in the lighting. Or like, why does my thing not look as realistic? And you get in there and you realize like, oh, there's like texture to this plastic. Or, oh, there's texture to the, like, or the metal is a lot shinier than I had mine. And these are things that you just learn. And then as you build that up and you go through photo after photo after photo, different subject, and you just power through it as I talked about, but learning from it like that, you will pick up the attention to detail skill, which is so vital. That's kind of, I'm learning like, so at Polygon, right? We have like a team of artists and sort of giving feedback. And I noticed like the artists that get attention to detail, it's like amazing to work with them because it's just like, bam, they just get it. But sometimes someone's maybe new at it or something like that. And the feedback, like when I look at the thing, I'm just like, why didn't you just overlay the photo on top of it? You could tell that that's not right. There's not enough detail there. Attention to detail is such a crucial skill that any recruiter of any studio will tell you is like such a key component. And you get that through making photo after photo. So very few artists do that, but you'll be ahead of the rest if you do. Okay, we're 33 minutes in, making progress. Oh yes, number 7, create what you love. So motivation is the biggest factor. And if you were to focus on one thing, that would be the thing to focus on. And so creating what you love is a vital component of that. If you're into characters and and that's what drew you to art, was making characters, but a job recruiter or advisor told you that it's very hard to become a character artist. Architectural visualization is where it's at. And so you're like, all right, I should learn architectural visualization. But then you try it and you hate it. Guess what? You're probably not even going to get to become an architectural visualization artist because you probably won't finish it, right? You'll probably give up, or at least you'll half-ass it, right? It's almost like it's hard to put a value on it, but when you're really into something, you are able, like, failure and pain becomes it's not even registers, right? Like when I'm really working on something, like I hit so many brick walls and so many problems, and the render doesn't come out, and this doesn't work, and it doesn't export, and I can't bring in this. It's like, it doesn't matter, because you're really into it and you're enjoying the subject, and you get excited because you're getting closer, and another step and another step. If you don't enjoy it, every single one of those problems you had it's going to be like a roadblock. It's going to be like hitting a brick wall, and it's going to hurt, right? So creating what you love is so vitally important. So yeah, if a recruiter or a job advisor tells you to do something that you're not going to enjoy, I mean, we'll give it a shot. Make sure that, some of that advice is good if you want to get employed, but if it's not something you enjoy, yeah, maybe it's not for you. And I have to talk about this as well. One of the big differences between 2016 and 2020, 4 years later, is that society, I've noticed, has started to sort of creep their nose into the art community and started to get offended or upset at some of the things that artists have created. And, that's always been, controversial art in history has always been a thing. And there has been people that have been upset about certain art pieces. But now I see it in kind of droves that kind of upsets me. Like I posted a piece the other day, which was, there's this great artist, which I think is one of the few artists that really gets stylization and exaggeration. Input 2, I think I talked about it in my newsletter, but he was a great, he did this amazing drawing of this this girl that was like, like really big thighs and like skinny waist and really, like a sexualized thing. And then another artist, a blender artist, took that and made a sculpt of it. I thought it was fantastic. It was beautiful, really, really stunning. Posted on Twitter, and people were upset that disappointed in you, Andrew, that you posted this. Other people saying they're very upset with the hypersexualization of women in art. And you can have the opinion. I'm not saying that having opinions on art isn't part of the territory. That's kind of the whole point. It's usually to get a discussion going. Forget that. Man, I've been getting so many telemarketers. Just will not stop. I block all the numbers and they keep coming back. My goodness. Like that's always, that's a part of it. But it's when people start to tell you that that you shouldn't do that. Look, if you love drawing sexual things, you're a horny dude, and you're worried about what your family, your friends, or the art community will think of you if you were to do it, but that's what you really love doing, guess what? You should do that. Okay, now that might, people are like, oh, but no, if you want to get a job. Well, yeah, if you want to get a job, that's different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about as a hobby. If it's something that you really enjoy, do it. Let your freak flag fly, man, right? Like I talked about it in my presentation, right? Everything I was drawing was like just cute girls, and people on Facebook and Twitter were like, oh, is that all you're going to do? Draw cute girls? And I tried drawing some dudes just for the sake of it, to I felt like I had to, like, oh, I guess I should do some. And the love wasn't there, right? Okay. Now I do actually think that it is a good idea to have a broad range of art so that you learn more skills. I'm not saying that that's not a part of it. It definitely is, but do it for that reason, right? Don't do it because society says, or you're worried about it, like, oh, what are people going to think of me? You don't need to look far in history to see when societies or governments have stepped in and said what artists can and cannot create. And it's not good. Read this book, Dmitry Shostakovsky. I've said his name wrong. You can tell I really internalized the book. I can't even remember his name. But he was a Russian composer in the 1930s. And like a bunch of artists just got sent to the gulags, like all his friends, right? And he was just, like, what could he do? He couldn't make art about the thing that was affecting all the Russians at the time, which was that people were getting dragged off in the middle of the night, shot, or sent to gulags. And this was terrifying, and it's gotten out of control. And how do we stop it? Like, of course, that's what you want to make your art about. You can't. You couldn't do it. And I know that people are now focused on, like, how can we, make make society better for marginalized groups. I know that is a hot topic, and I agree with it. That's progress, right? But you don't want to live in a world where people are losing their jobs for artwork that they've made, or where they're being shunned for making something that they've done privately. Like that's the thing. Like who cares, right? So it's not for you, right? It's not for you. Okay, so somebody made just a horrible, raunchy, sexy image, and it was just vulgar and insulting. Well, the great art of history has done that. You don't have to agree with it to support the idea of somebody doing it, right? I mean, there's so many. Look at like Childish Gambino's "This Is America," right? It starts with somebody with a bag over its head getting executed, shot point blank. Later on, he gets a machine gun and mows down some people in a church, right? Highly offensive, highly violent, in your face, right? But it's art. It's telling a message. If you're into it for political reasons and you really want to say a political message, but you're worried about, what's the point of doing art, right? There's so much red tape in life already. You've got governments telling you what you can do. You got to come down and renew your driver's license. Or, your boss tells you have to be here at this time and complete this training. Do you really want society telling you what you can do in your private time of you as an artist? If that's what you want to do the thing. That's all I would say, right? It's more important now than ever. Has to be, just reminded, right? And if you see other artists like getting shot down for making something that others disagree with or don't like stand up for them. Just go look, I don't particularly like it myself, don't agree with it, but so what? They're allowed, what is art? What's the point of this? What are you trying to do exactly? Just make art within this, everything has to be between these two lines of categories that we deem safe. That'd be great art. All right, moving on. So that was the 7 points. So daily work, volume, not perfection, stealing, conscious learning, pause, use feedback, and create what you love. Now, as I mentioned, 2 of those points, volume, not perfection, and steal, I don't think are particularly helpful for beginners. They're very valuable lessons, and I think they should be remembered for when you become an intermediate to expert or experienced user, because you will then know when and when not those things apply. But for beginners especially, I would add these 2 in their place: skill segmentation and reflection. And then another one. Oh, so there's 3. Okay. Don't bite off more than you can chew. So let me talk about those briefly. Before I do, though, let me ask you something. As we slide into an advert here, let's see if I can do it smoothly. If you were a chef, a career chef, and you wanted to get good at chefing, right? And that was your life mission. And in your path to become a good chef, you wanted to learn to make pasta. Would you try to do everything yourself? And I mean right down to growing the wheat and harvesting it and processing it to turn it into flour, making olive oil. No, of course not. You find out what is the strongest, the best producer within that category, what qualities lead to that, and then you purchase from them. You should be thinking in the same qualities when it comes to your 3D work. You don't need to learn to make trees. No artist really should, unless they're working on a project that needs a very, very unique tree. Most trees tend to look like trees. So if you've got one good realistic tree that's on a website available to purchase, you should buy it rather than try and make it yourself, because you'll waste weeks and weeks in the process. So professional artists know this, of course, but a lot of beginners don't. It might surprise a lot of people to learn just how much of the industry is based on using asset libraries. I mentioned this in my last ArcViz tutorial. Professionals do not model their own furniture unless the client has requested something that is so specific that they literally can't find it on any asset library already. So you should be doing the same. That's why we created Polygon, a library of high-quality assets, textures, photo scans, of a variety of things. So we've recently got into some outdoor models. We've done super, super high resolution, up to 16K, I believe, rocks from various places, and 3x3 meter photo scans of grounds. And look at that, another call. It happens It happens when you hit record. And so anyways, Polygon. Polygon.com for all of your asset needs. You shouldn't be wasting time on things that don't matter. Use your time where it's valuable. Come to Polygon. That's why I made it. Poliigon for high quality assets. And maybe I'll get better at doing these promos as the podcasts go on. Does anyone know what the hell to do with these stupid scammers? Like, I was not getting them for years, right? Years. I was like, I guess the whole telemarketing business just died out, or like the laws changed or something to make it illegal. And then just lately, it's like all I've been getting, just like every single day. And I can't deal with it. And then they call back. It's like you let them know very clearly in some colorful language that you are not interested, and please take me off the list. Click the next day. Hello, sir. It's I was calling to check if you were interested. I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I don't know what to do. If anyone does, let me know. Anyways, we're going back to our point of discussion, which was, if I can find the app. Yes. Okay. So the 3 extra skills. Skill segmentation. Skill segmentation is deconstructing your whatever it is you're trying to learn into manageable chunks and then focusing on each one individually. And I saw this for years. Like you'd see, like on ArtStation or a forum or something, somebody would post like a painting that they'd done and they'd go, the focus for this piece was lighting. And I would like look at it and I'd go like, but why? Why just one of them, right? Like there's colors, there's shading, there's proportion. Like why did you just focus on one of those? Clearly you need all of them in order to bring it together there. Why was lighting the focus? And it was only through like looking through my previous works of the last 18 months that I realized what was going on here. So when you are creating things, when you're a beginner at something, you are going to be doing some things correctly and some things incorrectly by accident. You won't intentionally have drawn the line there, but it's just the right place that the nose should have been. And you got that thing right, and it looked good. And when you look across all the 50 faces you've drawn in the last week, you'll go like, that one was good, but I don't know why. I don't know what it was about it. And if you aren't doing skill segmentation, if you are bringing each piece to its final, fully realized form, and you're not aware of what goes into each of those skills, it's becoming buried by the other things on top of it. Do you know what I mean? Let me say it like this. So I was looking at a piece that I did, it was about a year ago, of Ryan Gosling from Blade Runner. See, I do some dudes, right? And it was like a fully shaded form, like copied, reference to reference like that. And I looked at it and I went, wow, the proportions were off. Like his nose was in the wrong place or something. It was longer. The face was longer than it needed to be. I can't remember what it was. And I had all this shading on top of it and completely buried at that point of time when I was making it, the fact that the proportions were off. I was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed by shading. And because I didn't break down each of the individual skills and go like, if I had to make proportions the best thing ever, how can I get proportions exactly right? What would that look like? I was just burying it on top of it. So skill segmentation, I think, is a very important skill. The skill of skill segmentation. It's actually talked about, in fact, I got it from the book, The 4-Hour Chef. Hey, Chef. By Tim Ferriss, which is a book on how to, it's like sort of like culinary arts and like how to, but also it's a book on how to learn something, which is why I actually bought it. Because like the first few chapters talk about skill segmentation, deconstructing what it is you want to learn into manageable chunks and figuring out what the key components are that actually lead to a good result. So it's a good book, by the way, if you want to check it out. You'll also learn how to cook through it, which is actually also a very valuable skill. Because turns out every human being on planet Earth needs to cook or needs to eat. And unless you're going to have your own chef Turns out you need to cook. Anyway, it's a great book. So skill segmentation is that. So let's break it down. So for 2D, if you're into 2D arts, digital arts or whatever, these are the technical skills for that. There is proportions, there is gesture, there is shading, there is line accuracy, there is perspective. There might be a couple of others in there. Shading, and then there's like the paints of that. It's like the light groups. There's the light, the shadow. I guess that's kind of maybe, I guess you could kind of link that to shading. But anyway, so that's sort of 2D. Then for 3D, you've got modeling, texturing, probably sculpting, and then because of that, retopology in order to apply texturing, rendering, lighting, compositing, perhaps. So these are sort of the skills. So if you wanted to break down each one of those, you would want to focus on modeling. So just as a modeling project, you would not bring it to the full like textured state. You could if you wanted to get there eventually. You would just focus on the modeling and go like, I'm going to make this chair. I've done a tutorial on a chair if you want to watch that. It's the full modeling workflow, of course. But it's like, I'm going to make the chair. How do I get the model to exactly to the point that it is matching that chair one-to-one? And you bring it up and you do the modeling with the reference photo right behind it or whatever it is you're going to do. And you actually focus, and you don't just like, because that's the other thing. You want to jump to the next step. You go like, that looks like a chair. Next step, texturing. And next step, lighting. And next step, rendering. And then you post it and people go, it doesn't look like the real chair. And you don't know what it is because you put all this other stuff on top of it. Whereas if you just focus on this, if you broke it down, skill segmentation, and just focused on the modeling, you would be forced to realize that, yeah, there's a bevel on that edge of that chair there. That front part is supposed to be flat, but you made it rounded, or X, Y, Z, right? There's a whole bunch of things that could go wrong there. So anyway, that's skill segmentation. Next one, if I can remember it offhand, is... I can't remember it offhand. That's what talking does. Turns your brain to mush. It shouldn't, but it does. Reflection. Oh, reflection. Okay, so this is similar to pausing. However, it's slightly different in that reflection is a time period, like you use one of your practice sessions every month. If you're doing like an hour a day every month, if you're doing like 8-hour days of just practice, maybe do it every week. But one of your sessions should be just to look back on the volume of work that you created during an allotted time period and intensely focused on why it was that, well, first of all, seeing if you're improving. That's a very valuable point to make. And if you're not, try and figure out why you are not improving. It's something that I thought was kind of like a waste of time. So this last 18 months that I've been drawing, every hour I would sit down. I only have an hour. I'm just going to draw. And sure, it was in Procreate and there was all the other stuff behind it. But I never really extracted it out, put it all on. I just like extruded it and put it in Lightroom or whatever and had them all out there. All the sketches, all the finished pieces, everything in chronological order as I made it. And it forced me to realize that I was repeating mistakes. And that's never a good thing because it means that you did not learn the mistake. And you didn't even know you were making a mistake at that time. When you finished the piece, you weren't able to spot the mistake. You moved on to the next piece, which is why I kind of think the volume, not perfection thing can kind of lead beginners astray. So reflection, I think, is a very valuable exercise. I didn't think it would, and it was one of the most important. Like, in fact, if you're feeling demotivated, that's the other thing it did for me. Like, I was feeling like, I feel like I'm not really getting anywhere. Kind of demotivated. I don't really know what to do. I'm going to have a break. But before I have a break, I'm going to do this little reflection exercise. And it completely reinvigorated me because I was realizing like, oh my goodness, the perspective's wrong. Or, oh my goodness, the where I'm putting the lines is wrong. I think there's something to do with, oh, that's right. I also discovered like stroke thickness, right? Like I was using a tapered brush, which I felt is good. I mean, it's kind of like more like a pencil, right? Like you get to see like how hard something is that you can put more emphasis in certain areas. Problem with a tapered brush is that when you're drawing, if you just wanted to get good at proportions, like where things should be on a face, the tapered brush, if you taper it in the wrong area and put like less of a brush in this area or a heavier part in this area, it could kind of throw off the visual look of it and you won't know that something's in the wrong place even though it is.
It's coming back to that kind of burying thing. It hides the mistakes under extra things that make it harder for you to spot the mistakes. So when I switched to just a hard brush, a hard round brush with no tapering, then when I did the lines, it was very clear to me when I got something wrong. So that's, again, something I learned in a reflection exercise. So you don't need an expert for this. Obviously, it helps if you had an expert, amazing art teacher that you'd already paid the tuition fee of 50 grand or whatever it is students are dropping nowadays on something not worth that at all. Sure, make use of it, but you don't need one. You can do it yourself because your eye is usually pretty good at looking back on work and going like, one of these is better than the other. Why is it better than that? And then delving in deep and then bringing out a pad and maybe doing some extra sketches to confirm, like, have I got that wrong? Have I got that right? And I found it to be a very eye-opening exercise. All right. And the final one is only bite off what you can chew. And this is the latest one that I've learned, and it made things very clear to me. So as I mentioned, motivation is the crucial thing you need to focus on when you're getting into something. Staying motivated. Now, there are things in art, there are subjects that you can create in 3D, in 2D, across the board. You could make a landscape in 3D, or you could make a character. One of these is significantly harder than the other. It's characters, in case you didn't know. And what this means is that you are going to be trying to do something which is kind of like doing the boss level before the tutorial level in the game, okay? It's leaping to the extremely hardest part that only experts of a skill can really pull off and trying to do it at the beginning. Now, I did this deliberately. Like, I knew that humans were hard when I was drawing humans. I knew that it was hard, okay? I knew that what I was doing was very challenging, but that was kind of the point. I was trying to get good at characters. I was trying to learn it. But I also didn't know proportions. I didn't know shading, and I could have learned those on things that were easier than a human. The reason I think this is important, and what I'm talking about, is picking something that is suitable for your skill level. And it became clear in, I think it's from a YouTube channel, FZD School, I think it was. He was talking about it in one of his videos about kind of like the like a graph of like easy to hard, and then he kind of put like subjects which were like easy or hard to draw, and like on the left, scale of things was like like mountains, clouds, insects. And then like objects, which are like, household objects, like a kettlebell. I don't know why I keep pointing to that. It's the one thing I can see there. But things like that, that's kind of easy to do. And then up the scale all the way to the end, it's like humans. And so the reason this is important is that this plays into motivation. If you are finding yourself demotivated and you're feeling like, oh, I can't bring myself to punish myself and fail at this thing again, it might simply be that you are trying to do something which is far harder, far too difficult for you. If I was trying to get my wife to play, I don't know, what am I playing at the moment? Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, I wouldn't start her on the end chapter. I haven't even got there. I don't know what happens, but I assume it's probably more difficult than the opening, right? You wouldn't start there. You want to start at the very beginning, the tutorials. Squeeze this trigger to aim, squeeze this trigger to do it. And the reason for that is that if you punish yourself, if you bite off more than you can chew, it is far less likely you're going to come back the next day to fail again. It eats away at your motivation. That's what I'm trying to get at. That's what I'm trying to say with words, is it eats at your motivation and it makes it very hard to stay motivated. So I realized that what I had been drawing accidentally, usually female portrait faces, was the ultimate boss level. Okay, it's not only like characters are hard, but like if I had drawn the full body form, that would be better. Because here's the thing, we're more like, the reason humans are so hard, it's not anything particularly like nuanced about like the face that makes it like any different in geometry to, I don't know, something else, not a tissue box, but it's that we see faces everywhere, and our brain biologically is wired to notice subtle differences in the way somebody smiles or whatever as we're talking to them, so that we can read their emotion. And when something is off in the face, even slightly by a millimeter in your drawing, it can make things look very weird. Now, here's the other thing I didn't realize. Female faces are the ultimate hard one to do because their features are a lot softer. So male faces tend to be a lot more angular, tend to be a lot harsher, and you can get away with harsh sort of drawings with a male face because it looks more masculine, a sort of sharper angle. And so if you did that on a female face, it can kind of make them look like a man, half man kind of thing. If you've ever done one of those drawings where you sort of look back and go, I don't know what gender that's supposed to be. It could kind of look like that. So, so a female face. So I was doing these female faces with like the shading, and I'm trying to learn shading while I'm doing these things. And it's like the most subtle gradient difference between like here on the cheek and here on the cheek. And you would only be able to spot that difference if you had such a high attention to detail at an expert painting level that you would know that that part of the cheek is actually lighter than that part of the cheek, even though they look almost identical in light value. So I was accidentally trying to do the absolute hardest thing. So I recently started to do some Breaking Bad characters, Mike, Jesse, Walter White. It's coming along a lot better. I feel a lot better about it. I get to a point where I feel happy significantly faster with their faces because they're older, they're men, and you can get away with things. And also like not typical like models, right? You know, what do they say? Like the more attractive someone is, like the more they are towards the sort of average, like sort of perfect face. Whereas if you've got like a bigger nose or like a weird earlobe or something like that, that's something you can do in a caricature. Like I did learn something in the caricature exercise, like what makes something a likeness. You take that one thing and exaggerate it. And like models, which is what I was drawing, they have none of that. They're just a face. It's like the ultimate human female face with all of its correct proportions is what they actually look like as a model. And I was trying to draw them. So of course, when I did it, I was like, that doesn't look like the reference, because of course it was the ultimate hardest thing to do. And I was like, it was like stabbing myself in the leg with a needle every single day. It was painful, right? And you don't want to have to go through that. So I think in order to stay motivated, which is the number one thing you should focus on, biting off what you can chew is actually a critical habit to develop. So coming back to the list, because these are, I had the 7 from the ones that I presented, and then I have these 3 extra ones. If I was to put them into order for beginners, I would put it in this priority. Number 1, daily work. Still, it's the number 1 thing. If you can develop that habit, everything else falls into place. Number 2, create what you love. That plays into the motivation. If you're not creating what you love, you're going to drop out regardless. Number 3, skill segmentation. I actually put this really high. I think if you can deconstruct what you're going to learn into individual skills and then focus on each one of those individually, it'd be much better than if you try and like bury it in extra information that'll make it harder to spot those flaws. Number 4, conscious learning, not just practicing for the sake of practicing, but actually being aware of what you're practicing and when you're making mistakes and going back to it. Using feedback, not get feedback. Use feedback. That can be both. So if you've got access to an expert, by all means, go for it. Get their feedback. That's going to be really, really good. However, most people don't. As a beginner, you shouldn't expect to, but you can make use of that with photos. Photo reference, just go there and just create the real life. 1-to-1, 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 and just get through it. And as you do it, you'll start to pick up attention to detail. Why does this not look like my photo reference? Well, let's inspect it. Oh, the lighting is totally different. The material's wrong. There's extra detail, whatever. Number 6, pause. I put pause there as it's kind of like a technique, really, to sort of refresh your eyes. Don't finish one piece. Sort of get it 90% of the way, then jump to another piece. Start building off that piece. Then jump back to the 90% one. Then get it to 95%. then jump back to it. And yeah, working on consecutive projects at a time can refresh your eyes. Reflect, take that time period, as I mentioned, one of those practice learning slots to reflect on a period of work. I think, as I said, if you're practicing an hour a day, once a month, go back and look at your month's worth of work. If you're practicing like 8 hours a day, then maybe do it once a week. That's what I would recommend as reflection. And then number 8, bite off what you can actually chew. And then the final 2, of course, that were in the original presentation, volume, not perfection, and steal. Those are valuable habits, but I would put them more to the advanced sort of expert kind of level, because that's when it actually becomes important to know how to stylize things with stealing, and volume and perfection, knowing that what actual parts of it can lead to making something look good, versus just volume for the sake of volume and leading to laziness and bad habits. So, whoo, there we go. Hot damn. Let me get a drink here. Wow, that was one episode. So, what I was planning to do in this episode was finish with some Twitter questions, which I actually want to kind of make the format of this podcast. People send in questions, and I actually want to do video questions. So next week, I'll just be answering what people sent through on Twitter, because I asked people on Twitter, what have you got? And like 100 or whatever people replied with some really interesting answers. So questions. So I'm going to be answering those. It's going to be mostly related to burnout. So artist burnout, how to stay motivated, things like that. Going deeper into that topic, I know we talked about it already. So I'll be answering that in next week's episode. Week. By the way, when are the podcasts going to be released? I'm thinking fortnightly, so once every 2 weeks, which I want to make it weekly eventually, but I want to also make sure that this is actually something I want to do. And I think sticking to biting off what you can actually chew, I'm applying that to myself. I think a weekly podcast would run me down, but once a fortnight, I think I could do that. So that's what I'm going to do here. Eventually I want to get it to the point of you send in a video of yourself asking the question, and that'll be played with it. I can hear your voice. I can see what you look like. It's a little more fun for me and the viewers, rather than reading off a phone of what somebody asked. So that's what I'll get to eventually. But next week, it's going to be answering Twitter questions, and or next episode, fortnight. But thank you guys for watching. Go to polygon.com for your assets and texturing needs, and I will see you on my YouTube channel, Blender Guru, on the YouTube channel. And this podcast will, of course, be on all your podcasting apps once it is accepted and approved on the Spotify's, etc. So look forward to that. Thank you for watching. Bye.